Welcome back to the Goldmark Gallery for what promises to be a very, very special show here in the gallery front room. This is the second exhibition that we've ever had of works by Richard James. Our first was in 2016, and since then his work has grown hugely, both in terms of scale, in terms of complexity, delicacy. There was a really extraordinary range of pieces in this exhibition that I'm really looking forward to showing to you today. Quite what we call them, I'm not quite sure. It doesn't feel like any single word quite captures the range of what Richard does. Assemblages, boxes, reliquaries, cabinets, Wunderkammer. There are so many different ideas that he's pulling on, so many different things that he's been able to source and to arrange with extraordinary intricacy in these various display cabinets, these sort of compositions. We've got a fantastic catalogue with fully illustrated all the pieces in this show, and some wonderful text from Andrew Lambirth, who has delved into some of the works in this exhibition. I'm not going to dare get into the same level of detail that he has, but I am going to show you some of the wonderful things that are in these assemblages, and try and sort of demonstrate for you that the huge range of things that Richard is trying to take on, the range of themes that he's tackling, and some of the beautiful, beautiful things that he's been able to preserve in these boxes. If you could come back here with me to this back wall. Some of these large compositions are far larger in scale, far more demanding on Richard than they have ever been. These are works that have been created over the last 5 years. To call Richard a beachcomber is really doing him a disservice, and as Andrew Lambirth, who gave the title of this show, Beachcomber as Shaman, has shown, really what Richard is doing is far more than just collecting various bits of detritus, of refuse, of animal and insect remains from around the country. What he gathers and collects and presents for us in these fantastic compositions is a whole range of things that show just how profoundly interconnected our world really is. Much of the material that he sources is to be found around the coastlands of the British Isles, and in particular in Scotland, along the west coast of Scotland and in its northerly isles, places like the Hebrides. The range of themes that Richard is taking on, I think he likes to joke that it's all the big ideas, various aspects of science, astronomy, natural history, religious elements, a lot of sort of Catholic sacramentalism in some of these pieces, ideas of death and rebirth. There is all sorts going on in these pieces, so much so that actually Richard has made it very, very difficult for me today, because not only is there an inexhaustible amount of detail in these works, you could spend an hour, 2 hours looking over a piece like this, looking at the extraordinary complexity of how everything has been arranged, and even after that time still find things that you'd missed the first time round. Tiny pieces of decalled text, a little bird skull or a feather that you'd not noticed before. So not only are they endless almost in the amount of detail, in the intricacy that's gone into them, but they are so complex in terms of the themes that he's dealing with that there's no one single meaning that anybody could draw out from any of these pieces. This has been a really fundamental period of creativity for him, I think. Some really big leaps in terms of what he's been able to do with some of these compositions. You can see that unifying them, there's a kind of similar palette, that sort of palette of whites and blacks, of the sort of wonderful, rich, warm qualities in the sort of the oil, the bitumen, the resin that's used to present and preserve these different remains. As you can see in every single piece, we are looking at things that are dead, things that were once living. And one of the things that Richard has professed he wants to do in this work is to sort of pay reverence to the wildlife that we find throughout the country, but particularly at the coasts, and in particular our seabirds. The precarious nature of their day-to-day lives, of the cycles that they're living on, is really brought out in just how fragile some of these pieces are. And they have that feeling of something very profoundly sort of worshipful, something that's sort of like a votive offering in these sort of beautifully composed cabinets, something that's being presented as a celebration of what he's found. We'll find a few differences in this show from works in previous, in particular the appearance of humans in Richard's work for the very first time, I think. We'll see a few very small figures like we do in here. This is the old waves of the world. Really, Richard's collecting is quite broad. We'll find not just aspects of birds, but also insect life, often water, crushed rocks, sand, sediment, lanolin from sheep's wool. There's all sorts of things that are being brought together to create some of these compositions. And as you can tell from a piece like this, there's a number of different sort of pre-existing worlds that Richard is often drawing on. So you can see the sort of religious significance of something like this piece is very strong. This beautiful gold leaf that you've got inlaid in these different sections. And some of the beautiful insects we've got here. There's a lovely butterfly. Lots of these sort of natural history elements being brought together with very overt Christian symbolism. It's almost impossible when you look at a piece like this, even some of these sparser compositions like this beautiful one here, with this lovely intricate pattern of string and wire here, this beautiful foot that's been preserved at the bottom. Even in something as sparse as this, it's very difficult to get it in your head quite how difficult it must be to create works of art like this, that the level of intricacy and delicacy is extraordinary. Now, of course, boxes like these are not new, and Richard is not the first artist to be dealing with work like this. The name Joseph Cornell is probably quite familiar to a lot of you, another artist who looked at birds and found birds as something very special. But I don't know of any artist that's really dealt with things as intricately, with such a level of sort of delicacy that Richard has. Just looking at the tiny, tiny size of some of these bones, these insect wings, the fragility of these little skulls and things. And when he brings together that kind of fragile nature of the material that he's working with and blends it with this sort of mixture of religious and scientific thinking, and that's very obvious in a piece like this. This is the Litany of Last Things, so that final journey of the soul in the afterlife. It's very much that the fragility of what he's working with, that the delicacy, the sort of astounding fact that he's been able to get these things without them completely disintegrating. It very much reflects on quite how fragile these animals' lives are and how fragile our own existence is, how fragile these cycles, these sort of interdependent cycles of life in our world are, particularly given our human propensity for destroying those cycles. One of the pieces in this exhibition draws particular attention to that, to the extinction that our actions are bringing to the world around us. If we come around this corner to one of my favourite pieces, this is Old Earth Saints. And it's in a piece like this really that we get a feeling for the full range of what Richard is sort of drawing upon. We've got this beautiful sort of reliquary cabinet, almost like a sort of like an altarpiece, the way this has been presented. And we've got a number of different things that have been collected here. So just looking at this list of ingredients on the front cabinet, if I just pull this door in, we've got this beautiful petrel's foot in this sort of cruciform shape here. Along with the skulls of shag, blackbird and a green woodpecker. In fact, one of those is hidden within this egg here. A lot of the birds that we'll see in Richard's work are things like petrels, shearwaters. They're pelagic birds, birds that spend almost their entire lives out at sea, beyond the continental shelf, who return really only for very small periods of time to the coast during sort of breeding season, and often in the very dead of night, on a moonless night when they can't be spotted by gulls and other predators. It's an existence that's so alien to our own, this life of isolation and migration, of spending weeks, even months out at sea, sleeping on the wing. These tiny, tiny birds in such extraordinarily difficult conditions. It's something that's so sort of flabbergasting to us to comprehend. And I think a lot of the birds that we see in Richard's work, a lot of the animals in his work, living lives which we still don't fully understand as scientists, as researchers. So each of these boxes is a sort of reverential payment of respect to those birds. You'll also see things like these doctored prayer cards, the shape of this box, very much religious overtones, but also Richard's sense of time. And you can you get this very much in these sort of these glass test tube stratospheric breakdowns. So this is two pieces of glass here, which together give us a kind of sedimentary breakdown of the earth. So we've got the very core down here, the mantle, and then various elements that have been collected to sort of represent the different aspects of the world. So within here we've got gold and crushed rock, we've got a label here for blood, and then coming back up to the surface of the earth we've got a tiny fragment of once living sort of vegetation here that's almost a stand-in for a tree maybe. And then up here, as heaven, as a representative of heaven, a blue flower that's been kept in resin. There's also seawater in here. So one of the things that Richard often does is includes seawater. For the most part, the elements of his work are to be sort of preserved, but there are times when things like salt water from the sea, collected from a particular part of the coast, is left to sort of drop down through these glass areas and create rust within the iron in the ground rocks. There's a sense of time actually changing the art piece itself. Some of the most moving, though, in this exhibition are often the simplest, and this is one of my very favourites. A very, very touching piece. This is Prayer for Ridibundus, which is the Latin name for a laughing gull. That's been very movingly preserved in this cabinet. There's a lot of Richard's work feels almost like a kind of hagiography, that we're looking at the natural world being celebrated as saints almost. Saints who, of course, often in their time weren't respected, were maltreated, and it's only in due time after their death that they've come to be celebrated and venerated. We'll carry on round to a few of these larger pieces here, much larger than I think we've typically seen from Richard. And there's also scattered about in these different assemblages, a little more colour than we've seen before. This is a really lovely one, adorning the front cover of the catalogue. And this fantastic blue just really sets off the sort of beautiful, muted, earthy colours that are otherwise in Richard's work. A lot of these assemblages are dealing with, as well as the sort of religious and the spiritual and the sort of faith-driven ideas of the world, also of science, of astronomy and navigation by stars, the sort of things that tie both in with contemporary science, contemporary research, and the very old rhythms of life on the coast, of sailors going out to sea, navigating by the stars, as perhaps seabirds might do. There's some very strange things involved in this pair of assemblages here. Some very strange sort of communication array machinery that's been collected that contrasts with some of these more natural found objects. Richard has been making works like these for a number of years now, but really they go back to his time as an art student when he first thought of trying to incorporate the real world in his work. It wasn't good enough for him just to represent it in his paintings. He wanted it to be literally there. He started with feathers and skulls, trying to attach them to paintings, and of course the larger these got, the more they had to have a box built around them, a front put on them. Never quite satisfying. So what we're seeing in these sort of extraordinary compositions is a way of working that's been developed over many years, that's been refined, and it involves a huge amount of work, a huge amount of time, the amount of time that it takes to preserve these things that he's found, to even select them. When you're working at this level, it becomes very much a matter not just of finding things, but of deciding what to pick up and what to leave behind, what's good enough for preservation. Which is also very adept at sort of breaking out of the sort of confines of the box, so including these sort of hinged aspects. There's a lovely plaster cast, I'm assuming of his hand here actually. Really quite macabre. Almost sort of going back into the roots of assemblage as a sort of surrealist idea. But Richard's creativity with these different boxes, using different shaped containers to suggest different things. We've got this fantastic violin case down here for Eden's first jig. I think he's used a couple of violin cases in the past. And then we also see elements of Richard's knowledge as a graphic designer. He, I think, studied fine art for 2 years before switching to a graphics course, and still works today partly as a graphic designer. So lots of these star charts, the printed material, the text that we find, the photography that's been layered in with these compositions comes from his hand. So what we're seeing is such a huge breadth of technique, of craft, of huge care taken to every single aspect of these compositions. And really, they speak for themselves. There's only so much I can point to the various details, that I can reveal different symbolisms. Really, they're here to be looked at, to be enjoyed over a period of time, and they really reveal themselves the longer you are with them. I really like these fantastic astronomical models that we'll see in a number of the pieces in this exhibition, that keep tying that idea back to the rhythms, the cycles that's going on, but also that idea that we are all essentially the same stuff, that we were all came to existence as the result of stardust from many, many millions of years ago. There's something really very moving about what Richard does, and it sort of defies any attempt to explain the ideas behind his work, explain the many connections that are being made, the many different themes that he's drawing upon. And really it speaks to the importance of art, and particularly today. Science and religion both have their hugely important, their hugely valuable roles in our world today. And they both pull on different aspects of us. The ideas of faith and of knowledge and of rational thought, these are very difficult things to contend with. And it's only really in art that we can find a space to explore these things together, that we can bring these different aspects together. It's in an art as profound as Richard's that he can take something that's incredibly personal to him, incredibly meaningful to him, very intimate, and make something as complex as these compositions that then speaks to other people too, and through which we can find our way into all sorts of different schools of thought, into all sorts of different questions. I think this is some of the most personally moving work that we've exhibited here at the gallery. I thought we'd end on this. This is one of the strongest pieces, I think, in the exhibition. It is, I think, in a piece as strong as this one, that we get a real feeling for not just how much Richard cares for the world that he is bringing into his art, from the various birds, the creatures, their lives, which are then venerated in these pieces, but also the level to which we often ignore that world. A piece like this, as beautiful and moving as it is also a clarion call, really, to look at what is out there around us and to see it in a completely different light. There's such an extraordinary amount of detail in this show. We couldn't hope to cover it all in a single walkthrough. We could have spent half an hour on a single piece here. If you can, I urge you, please do book an appointment, get in touch with us, let our gallery team know that you'd like to come, and spend an hour or two looking around this exhibition. It's such a rich and rewarding show. There's so much to see. And I think you'll find, as I did walking around, really quite a profoundly moving experience too. I look forward to seeing some of you here in the gallery. I'm sure we will be able to look at some of these pieces in more detail in the days and weeks to come. I hope you've enjoyed just getting an idea of what Richard has to offer here though. It's a fantastic exhibition and I implore you, do come and see it for yourselves. I hope to see you again soon.